I still remember the weight of the sun that morning, the way it pressed against the back of my neck, as if trying to burn my excitement away before the day had even begun. My father's old pickup rumbled up the gravel drive toward the Navy base gates, and I sat in the back seat, clutching a folded flyer so tightly that the edges dug crescents into my palms. Family Day was printed across the top in bold navy blue letters, with a list of events, parades, obstacle courses, food trucks, and, most importantly, the Junior Rifle Skills Challenge. I had been counting the days for weeks, whispering to myself each morning, "This is where it starts, Harper. This is where you finally prove you belong." The base smelled of jet fuel and sea air, the kind of sharp, electric scent that made the whole place feel alive. Families were everywhere, moving like schools of fish between booths and tents, voices rising in 100 different conversations. I kept my eyes fixed on the distant white canvas tent where the competition was being held. The rifles, lined neatly on racks, caught the morning light like something sacred. "Harper, slow down," my mother said as I darted ahead, her voice carrying that sharp edge she always got when she thought I was about to embarrass us. She adjusted her sunglasses and gave my father a look, the kind that asked him to intervene. He didn't. He just smiled faintly, one hand resting on my shoulder as I bounced impatiently on the balls of my feet. I had been practicing for this. Not officially. Our family didn't exactly have money for lessons, but my grandfather's old .22 rifle had sat in the attic for years, and my father had shown me how to hold it, how to breathe, how to treat it with the respect it deserved. I had learned to steady my hands in the quiet hours behind our house, the field stretching out like a private training ground. Today was supposed to be my chance to see if all of that meant something. But as soon as we reached the registration table, my world tilted. The man standing behind it was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate despite the casual setting. The silver gleam of his rank pinned to his collar told me who he was before the name on his badge registered, Admiral Cole Mercer. He had the kind of presence that made you straighten your spine without thinking, his eyes sharp enough to slice through excuses before they were spoken. I slid my form across the table, my heart hammering in my ears. "Here for the Junior Rifle Challenge, sir." My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. He looked me over once, his gaze lingering on my ponytail, my scuffed sneakers, and the sleeves of my jacket that swallowed my wrists. His mouth flattened into a line. "How old are you?" 10, I said quickly. "But I've practiced. I can." "It's boys only this year," he interrupted, his tone final, as if the conversation were already over. "We want to keep the event competitive. Maybe next year, kiddo." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung there, like distant thunder I hadn't processed yet. Then they hit, sharp and humiliating. Boys only. As if the hours I had spent behind that rifle, the blistered hands, the whispered promises to myself, were nothing more than a game of pretend. "But the flyer doesn't say." My voice rose, brittle and small. "Look," he said, softening just enough to make it worse, "there's plenty for you to do here. Go enjoy the carnival. The challenge isn't for everyone." Behind me I heard laughter. A boy's voice, loud enough to draw blood. "Told you, Lane. Guess they don't let little girls play soldier." I didn't have to turn to know it was Reed Callahan, the neighbor's son who never missed a chance to remind me I didn't belong anywhere near a rifle. He was older, taller, already wearing a smug grin I could feel like heat on my back. My cheeks burned. The world blurred at the edges, not with tears, I wouldn't give them that, but with the dizzy spin of rage and shame mixing until I could barely breathe. My father stepped forward, his hand hovering near my shoulder, but I shook him off before he could speak. I couldn't bear the pity in his eyes, not now. "Come on, Harper," my mother murmured, her voice low, tight with the kind of embarrassment she never bothered to hide. "It's not a big deal. Let's just go watch the parade." It was a big deal. To her, it was just a Saturday. To me, it was the day I'd finally step into something bigger than myself, something that connected me to the stories my grandfather used to tell about focus and grit and earning respect. Instead, I stood there with my fists balled so tight my nails left half-moons in my palms, staring at Admiral Mercer as he turned away to greet another family, already forgetting I existed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that I could hit a target from 50 yards without blinking, that I'd spent more hours practicing than any of those smirking boys ever would. But my voice felt trapped somewhere deep, swallowed by the lump in my throat. So I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at the rifles lined up on the rack, each one gleaming in the sunlight like something I wasn't allowed to touch, and I made myself a promise, so quiet I wasn't even sure I heard it out loud. Someday they won't be able to tell me no. Not because I asked, but because I'll be too good to ignore. And as I followed my parents back through the crowd, my face set like stone, the laughter still echoing behind me, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The first few days after Family Day, I didn't touch my grandfather's rifle. It sat in the corner of my room, propped against the wall like a silent reminder of how foolish I'd been to believe I belonged on that range. Every time I glanced at it, I saw Admiral Mercer's eyes, cold and dismissive, and heard Reed Callahan's laugh drilling into the back of my skull. I told myself I didn't care, that maybe my mother was right and it was just a silly dream, but the ache in my chest wouldn't go away. My father must have seen it because one Saturday morning, without a word, he loaded the rifle into the truck and told me to get in. We drove for almost an hour, past the edge of town, until the asphalt gave way to dirt and the trees swallowed the horizon. When we stopped, we were at a small, almost hidden range that looked like it had been forgotten by the world. There were only 2 wooden benches, a row of targets in the distance, and the distant hum of cicadas in the trees. He handed me the rifle. "You're not quitting," he said simply. There wasn't judgment in his voice, just a quiet certainty, the kind that made it impossible to argue. Not because of one man. Not because of one day. I wanted to argue anyway, to tell him that Mercer was right, that maybe I didn't belong out here. But instead, I slung the strap over my shoulder and followed him to the bench. My hands shook the first time I aimed, the barrel wavering as if it weighed twice as much as before. The shot cracked, loud in the still air, and the bullet landed nowhere near the paper. The sting in my eyes almost brought tears, but I blinked them away. It went like that for hours, miss after miss, my confidence shrinking with each empty hole in the target. By the time the sun had begun to dip low, I was ready to put the rifle down and never pick it up again. My father must have sensed it because he didn't push me to continue. He just packed the rifle, started the truck, and drove us home in silence. It might have ended there if not for the woman who watched me from a distance that day. The next time we returned to the range, she was waiting. She stood near the benches, arms crossed, her short gray hair tucked beneath a ball cap. She had the kind of presence that felt solid, like she'd seen more than most people ever would and carried it without needing to prove anything. "You hold it like it's glass," she said when I set the rifle down between rounds. Her voice was rough, but there was no cruelty in it, just observation. "That's why it fights you." I stared at her, unsure what to say. She noticed my hesitation and extended a hand. "Ruth and Doyle. Used to coach Olympic juniors. Been retired a while. I watched you shoot last week. You've got steady eyes, but your hands don't trust them yet." I looked to my father, who only shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Ruth and nodded toward the bench. "If you want to learn, I'll teach you. But it's not easy. You'll hate me some days. Still want it?" Something in me lit up at her words, something that had been dim since Family Day. I nodded. Training with Ruth and was nothing like I expected. She didn't start with firing at all. For the first week, she made me balance coins on the barrel, learning to keep it perfectly still while kneeling, standing, and prone. She taught me how to control my breath, to let it move slow and even until my heart stopped pounding in my ears. "Your mind will quit before your body does," she told me as we stood in the morning fog, the rifle heavy in my arms. "And when it does, your hands will follow. So keep your head calm, and the rest will listen." Days bled into weeks. My arms ached, my knees bruised from hours in position. More than once, I left the range biting back tears, convinced I wasn't improving at all. But Ruth Ann never flinched, never softened. "Progress doesn't care about your feelings," she said one evening as the sky burned pink behind her. "You want to be good, you show up tomorrow. That's it." And so I showed up. Over time, the targets stopped looking so far away. My breath stopped catching in my chest before every shot. The first time I hit a bullseye dead center, Ruth Ann didn't smile, didn't congratulate me. She just said, "Again," and handed me another round. By the end of that summer, she signed me up for a small junior competition. It was nothing official, just a handful of kids, most of them older than me, competing for a cheap medal at a local fairground. I walked in with shaking hands, but Ruth Ann's voice echoed in my head. "The target doesn't care who you are. Only what you do, asterisk." I didn't win. Not even close. My shots were clean, steady, but too slow. I placed dead last. As they handed out medals, I felt the old sting of humiliation clawing its way back, the same one I'd felt on the Navy base months before. For a moment, I thought about quitting again, about leaving the rifle to collect dust in the corner forever. But as we packed up, Ruth Ann crouched beside me. Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the crowd. "You're not here to beat them yet. You're here to beat yourself. Every round, every match, you get closer. That's the only scoreboard that matters right now." I didn't say anything, but I held on to her words like they were the only thing keeping me upright. On the ride home, the medal clinking in Reed Callahan's hand somewhere across the fairgrounds echoed in my mind, but this time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the first mark on a much bigger target I hadn't yet hit. And for the first time since Admiral Mercer's voice told me I didn't belong, I believed I still might. By the time I turned 14, the range felt more like home than my own bedroom. The wooden benches were splintered, the air always carried that faint tang of gunpowder, and my palms had grown calloused enough that I barely noticed the weight of my grandfather's rifle anymore. What had started as a promise muttered under my breath had become something far larger, an anchor, a rhythm, a part of me I couldn't imagine leaving behind. And people had started to notice. I was no longer the kid who couldn't steady her hands. By the end of my third year with Ruth Ann, I was winning small regional matches, the kind that didn't make headlines but made whispers travel fast in the youth circuit. My name started popping up on lists. Not at the top, not yet, but far enough along that parents started leaning over to their kids, murmuring, "That's the girl Doyle's been training." My father was proud, though he kept it quiet, like showing it too much might jinx everything. My mother, on the other hand, still looked at my targets and medals like they were distractions, clutter piling up in the corner of my life. "This is all fine for now," she said one evening as I cleaned my rifle at the kitchen table, her voice careful but edged. "But college doesn't care how well you can shoot holes in paper." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to explain to her that the rifle wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was the only thing that made the sting of that day with Admiral Mercer fade, the only thing that made me feel like I had control over something in a world that seemed intent on underestimating me. When the invitation came for the Virginia State Youth Marksmanship Championship, I held the envelope in my hands so long my fingers went numb. It wasn't the Olympics, not even close, but it was the biggest event I'd ever been offered. The best in the state would be there, the kids who'd been winning since they could walk, the ones with parents who paid for top-tier equipment and private coaching. And I knew one of those names before I even opened the roster, Reed Callahan. He was 17 now, taller, broader, and louder than ever. If there was a spotlight, he knew how to stand in it. The moment he saw me during registration, his grin widened, the same condescending twist it had carried years ago. "Look who's still chasing a hobby," he said. his voice carrying just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You finally here to hand me a medal in person?" I didn't rise to it. Ruth and had drilled it into me too many times. Asterisk noise doesn't hit targets. People do. Asterisk I kept my eyes forward, my hands steady, though my jaw tightened until it hurt. What I hadn't expected was Admiral Mercer. He wasn't in uniform this time, just a pressed shirt and slacks, but his posture still carried that air of authority. He was there as a guest speaker, someone to hand out trophies and shake hands, his reputation enough to make half the room straighten their spines without thinking. When his gaze swept the registration hall and landed on me, there was no recognition. Just a polite, distant nod before he moved on. The first rounds of the competition blurred together, the crack of rifles and the rhythmic shuffle of shooters shifting positions filling the air. My focus stayed narrow, each breath measured, each trigger pull deliberate. I advanced steadily, not by blowing anyone out of the water but by refusing to make mistakes. By the final round, it was down to 3 shooters. Me, Reed, and a girl named Carly who had a reputation for being ice under pressure. The final course was brutal. Long distance, shifting winds, a timed segment meant to rattle even seasoned shooters. Reed thrived on theatrics, hitting his first few shots with a flourish, glancing toward the spectators as if to remind them who the crowd favorite was. My own shots felt slower, deliberate, but I trusted Ruth Ann's training. Asterisk don't chase speed. Chase precision. Asterisk. When the last shot rang out, my heart climbed into my throat. The scores were tallied, and the announcer's voice cut through the murmurs. 3rd place, Carly Jensen. 2nd place, Reed Callahan. 1st place, by a single point, Harper Lane. For a moment I didn't move. The sound of applause and murmurs washed over me, muffled and unreal. Reed's expression darkened, his usual smirk cracking as he turned away without a word, shoving past the other shooters. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it was quickly swallowed by something heavier, a realization that this wasn't the finish line I'd imagined as a child. Beating Reed didn't erase the memory of Mercer's dismissal. It didn't erase the years I'd spent convincing myself I wasn't just some girl playing soldier. When Admiral Mercer stepped forward to present the medal, his expression softened for the first time. His handshake was firm, his voice calm as he said, "You shoot cleaner than most I've seen at your age." But there was no apology, no acknowledgement of that day on the base. Maybe he didn't remember. Or maybe he didn't think it mattered. I smiled politely, thanked him, and walked off the stage. But inside, the fire was still there, hotter than ever. Winning a state title felt good, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not until there was a stage big enough that no one, not Reed, not my mother, not Admiral Mercer, could mistake this for a hobby ever again. As Ruth Ann helped me pack up my gear, her eyes flicked toward the medal in my hand. "Good," she said simply, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Now, are you ready to start training like this was just a warm-up?" I nodded, gripping the medal until the edges pressed into my palm. Because I knew, deep down, the state championship was just another stepping stone. The target I had in mind now wasn't a paper circle in Virginia. It was somewhere far bigger, under brighter lights, where every shot would matter more than any I'd ever taken. And for the first time I could almost see it. The air inside the Olympic arena felt different than any range I had ever stepped onto. It wasn't just the size of it, the rows of bright lights, the sheer stillness of thousands of eyes waiting, but the weight of every breath, every movement. The silence between shots was so sharp it seemed to hum, broken only by the faint clicks of rifles being set and reset. I stood behind my station, rifle balanced in my hands, my pulse steady but deep, like the ocean just before a storm. The years of training, the state titles, the long, cold mornings with Ruth Ann, all of it had led here. The women's 10-meter air rifle final, the last round. I was 19 now, wearing the navy blue and white of Team USA, my name stitched above my heart. My family was somewhere in the stands. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, like the echo of a heartbeat. I was in second place. The scoreboard glowed red and white, the numbers shifting after each shot. The leader was a shooter from Norway, precise and unshakable, her every movement fluid and practiced. I wasn't chasing her, not really. Ruth Ann's words still lived in the back of my mind. The target doesn't care about gold or silver. It only cares about what you do. But the gold was there, within reach, and I knew I had one last chance to claim it. The range master's voice cut through the silence. Final shot. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the rifle, the press of the cheekpiece against my skin, the faint smell of oil and steel. For a moment, everything faded. The lights, the crowd, even the scoreboard. All I could hear was a memory, faint but sharp. Admiral Mercer's voice from years ago, dismissive, certain. It's not for everyone. Maybe next year, kiddo. That voice had haunted me for almost a decade. It wasn't just about proving him wrong anymore. It was about the promise I'd made to myself that day, standing on that base with my fists clenched. Someday they won't be able to tell me no. I opened my eyes. My breathing slowed, my fingers finding their place along the trigger guard. The world narrowed to the paper target 33 feet away, the smallest black dot at its center. My heart stopped feeling like a drum and became a metronome, steady and slow. In that moment, I wasn't 19 or 10 or anything at all. I was just a line of focus, a stillness pulling the world into place. The shot broke clean, a sharp crack that seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have. I didn't need the screen to tell me where it landed, but when the score appeared, 10.9, a perfect shot, I felt my knees almost give out. The Norwegian's final shot was solid, but not enough. When the final tally appeared, my name rose to the top by 1/10 of a point. The arena erupted, a wave of cheers rolling over me, but it felt far away, like I was standing underwater. A gold medal. Olympic champion. It didn't feel real until I was standing on the podium, the ribbon heavy around my neck, the national anthem rising from the speakers. I looked out into the stands, finally spotting my father with tears in his eyes, my mother clapping so hard her hands must have stung. Ruth Ann stood beside them, arms crossed but smiling in that quiet, proud way she reserved for moments that truly mattered. After the ceremony, as I stepped down from the stage, I saw him. Admiral Mercer. He wasn't in uniform, just a plain dark jacket, but there was no mistaking the straight-backed posture, the way his presence still drew the room's attention even when he tried to blend in. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he stepped closer, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I remember you now. That day on the base." He paused, the faintest hint of something, regret, maybe, crossing his face. "I thought I was keeping things fair back then, making sure the boys had their space. I was wrong. You showed me what real competition looks like." I didn't know what to say. Part of me had imagined this moment for years, the satisfaction of hearing him admit it. But now, with the gold medal still warm against my chest, it didn't feel like I thought it would. He wasn't the reason I was here. Not really. I nodded, offering a small smile. "The target doesn't care, Admiral. Only what you do." For the first time, he smiled back, a brief but genuine curve of his lips. Then he stepped aside, letting me walk past into the hallway where my team waited. The weight of the medal felt heavier now, not because of its value, but because of everything it carried. The early mornings, the calluses, the moments I almost gave up, the little girl standing at a Navy base with a promise clenched between her teeth. As I joined my teammates, laughter and congratulations filling the air, I thought about that voice that used to whisper in the back of my mind, the one that sounded like doubt, like fear, like every person who ever told me no. For the first time, it was silent. And I knew, with a clarity sharper than any shot I'd ever taken, that this was only the beginning. The podium wasn't the finish line. It was just another starting point, another target waiting downrange, and I wasn't planning on missing.